Hi, my name's Aaron Patton, and I figure I'd just bring you my personal testimony and my vision of ministry in this way, in this format, because a story, especially in a testimony, I find needs to be shared. And sometimes you don't just get the passion behind it if it's written. Now, the first time that my faith started to become my own, because I was raised in a Christian home, I was a young child, probably about the age of 6. And my experience was very spiritual, and it was very dependent upon the Lord to get me through it, and He showed up in a very, very powerful way. I used to have a bedroom, and my bedroom had my bed, and it was kind of tucked into the corner of the room, and it was a bunk bed. And I used to have the sheets draped down from the top bunk on the one side and the shorter, narrow side where my feet were. It became kind of my cave, my sanctuary, if you will. And the only thing I really had in there was on the wall I had this poster of the Lord's Prayer. And it was really cool. My parents always put it there and I never really grasped it. I mean, I was able to read it, but it just, it was a nice thing. And one night I woke up in a cold sweat, just drenched, and I was just in such a panic and a fear, and I couldn't explain why. I just knew something was wrong. So I had to go see my parents. I was like, okay, I need to get out of here. Heaviness, and I just threw up the blanket, and I was walking towards the door, and as I kind of put my feet out from on the bed onto the floor and I looked up, I saw a silhouette of a demon about 3 feet tall. And he had really jagged curves to his body and his figure in the silhouette. And the only thing I could see were these 2 piercing eyes of just evil. So I quickly shut the blanket again. I laid back down, trying to figure out what was going back on. Trying to figure out what was going on. It terrified me. So I decided, okay, if I just go back to sleep, everything will be fine. So I forced myself back to sleep, thinking that, in the morning my parents would come, everything would be fine. And I was able to force myself to go back to sleep 2 or 3 times. And each time I did, I fell back into this dream where I was in the exact same situation, and I would run, and this demon would be able to catch up to me and get me. And every time it got me, I would awake. And I would look over and I could see through the blanket the silhouette from the nightlight I had. And every time I did, every time I woke up and looked over at it, it would take a step closer. So the space between us was quickly getting narrow. And I decided to take a new tactic. And I decided to try and let out a scream and a holler, trying to get attention from my parents who were just down the hallway. No more than 15 feet down the hallway from my bedroom. So I screamed as loud as I could and as hard as I could. And I was banging on the wall on my right side of my bed because it was tucked in the corner. But it was almost like someone had hit the mute button on everything except for this thing's presence. I could hear it moving around and taking raspy breaths, but everything else was silent. I mean, there was no sound coming from my body. There was no sound when I smashed the wall. It was just dead calm. And I knew then that I was in trouble. I mean, I had screamed so loud the next morning my mom had looked at my eyes and I'd actually burst a couple of blood vessels. But as I said, I knew at that moment I was in trouble because this wasn't just a dream. This wasn't just my imagination. This was something powerful. This was something real. And this was something so evil that I was terrified. I'd never felt terror before in my life like that, but I was terrified. And as I remembered my parents talking about Jesus, the Son of God, I can always call on Him for help, I leaned over and I reviewed the Lord's Prayer. And I said it aloud. And just as I finished it, my dad burst in through the door. And he was rebuking whatever was in there, and he was praying in tongues and shouting aloud, and this thing disappeared. And it was almost like an illumination filled the room. And it was a pretty powerful thing. I asked him years later why he came into my room at that exact moment. And he said that an angel had come to him in a dream and said, "You need to get up, go to your son's room, and pray these words aloud." So it was a really cool experience just to be able to feel God's power and His grace. I mean, the fact that I called upon the Lord in my greatest time of need when I felt threatened physically, terrified spiritually and emotionally. And He showed up, and He took care of me. He redeemed me, and He sent my Father to come in, speaking His words. Jesus showed up, and He changed my life. That's a very, very short version of that part of my testimony, and one of many stories where Christ has been there in my life. But I think that's probably the most impactful for when the relationship I now share with Christ started to become my own and not just something that I grew up in, which really impacts my vision of ministry. I mean, what do I want to see happen? I want to see the church act in such a way that we go back and act like they did in Acts 2. I mean, when we were so bold and confident in the Lord that we go out and we proclaim who Jesus is and describe and show with our actions Jesus' revolutionary character of love. This Jesus that went against society, that went against the foundations that rule His day, because it was needed then and it's needed now, especially in our young people. The Jesus who saved me and who saved countless others because of His grace and His mercy, just by calling on His name. And in that name, when we invoke His name by His authority, and we invoke His name and call upon Jesus, that the dead will rise, the demons will be cast out and flee, that we will dream dreams and see visions and pray prophecy over people's lives, that signs and wonders and miracles and healings will follow our proclaiming of Jesus Christ to the nations. I want to see my generation, the generations younger than me, the generations older than me, taking authority in Jesus' name to the extent that these things come to life, that these things are given power. When we breathe these words, we're not just saying them and speaking them for no apparent reason, but we're breathing them into existence, that when we proclaim Jesus' character, like I said, the dead will rise. The healings and miracles, and that the numbers of Christians be added to the Christian family, and the faith and the trust in Jesus Christ daily. I want to see that come. That's my vision of ministry. Thank you very much. A little bit more information about me. I love to preach. I love to preach. I love to work with youth and young adults, especially just because I seem to get them and they seem to get me. I love to work with anybody, really. Ministry is an important part of me. I've spent 4.5 years getting my Bachelor of Theology degree at Alberta Bible College. And I would love nothing more than to have a job where I could minister on a daily basis and be able to be a part of the system and influence and help support in any way I could. So thank you again for listening to this video and watching this video. And I hope that my resume gets to you okay, and if there's anything missing, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me. Thank you very much. God bless. Bye-bye.